TipTut.
Hello everybody and welcome back to TipTut. Today, it's another Basics for Beginners. We're taking a look at shape theory. Now, before I get started, let me just tell you this is not going to be a comprehensive guide. This is more of an intro for those who really want to get started in design and understanding how shapes invoke meaning just inherently in the very being that they are. They have meaning assigned to them subliminally. And this is going to touch upon that and then hopefully offer some ways for you to advance your knowledge even further past this. So let's get started. So shape theory for beginners then. Basically, much in the same way that the human mind derives meaning from color, as we spoke about in our color theory tutorial, it too derives meaning from shape, meaning that when we see a certain shape, a certain pattern on the screen, our mind subliminally, unconsciously derives meaning from that. And depending on the shapes and lines and corners and things like that, we derive different meanings from what we see without even really realizing it until we sit down and actually analyze it ourselves. So a designer, therefore, can use this to infer meaning within their designs. Basically, everything that you put on the page will have a meaning of some kind, and you want to make sure that as much as you put down as possible is actually sort of on purpose, meaning what it is. Plenty of designers out there put things on the page for no other reason than it looks good. And that's fine. That's a totally fine thing to do. But what makes a great designer stand out, and I wouldn't put myself in that bracket, I'm still very much learning, but what makes a great designer stand out is understanding what their shapes and what their elements on their page mean, what they infer, basically. So I'm just going to take you through the basic shapes and their bog standard entry-level understandings and what it is they convey. So let's start off then with circles, ovals, and ellipses. Now, circles, by their very nature, evoke a positive message. They're often linked with things like community, unity, friendship, love, things like that. And that's because of their natural shape. If you look at a circle, your eye is drawn around it and back to where you started, just by the very nature of the curve. Now, you can see here on a high contrast background, for example, our blue circle on the red background, naturally, you find your eye moving around it. Now, as a Western audience, you read from left to right. So the first thing you'll probably read is the sentence circles, ovals, and ellipses evoke, and then the shape of that circle draws you around it and almost back onto itself again, and that's where that sort of sense of community and unity comes from, in that it is involving and it's accepting, and it's a shape that imbues a sense of acceptance, but it does that by separating itself from every other element on the page. Everything within the circle is a sense of community. So you can use circles to link objects together and things like that. Now, rings evoke the similar sort of thing. However, they are, in Western culture at least, attributed also to marriage and partnership and longevity. And longevity, especially because of that nature, like I said, of a circle or a ring in itself, you're naturally bringing it back around to where it starts. Ignoring, of course, the fact that there is no obvious place where a circle starts and ends. There's that age-old, saying. But if you pick any point on a circle, your eye will naturally draw yourself back around to that point. And that's where that idea of longevity and marriage and partnership. By marriage, I don't mean literally getting married. It can do, but the marriage of two separate things, if you like. Not necessarily marriage as in, the Christian ceremony that some people do. The religious ceremony that some people do. Also Sonic the Hedgehog, because rings. So here's some examples of logos then. Now, this isn't just logo design we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about other things as well, but logos are a great place to start because they have to convey their meaning in as simple a way as possible, basically. Now, think about some of those things that we just talked about: marriage, partnership, longevity, but also positivity, community, unity, friendship, love, all these things. Now look at these logos and think how they include those. Let's take the Walt Disney one, for example. Walt Disney is known for being this family-friendly, on the surface at least, family-friendly, loving film franchise. Okay, so there's this collection of films and all of them have a certain theme and all of them run along the certain lines, and there is this sense of family and community within Walt Disney. They are their own contained thing, and everyone has seen a Disney film. Now, the way that they invoke that in the logo, for example, is this sort of star line or moon shape that goes across the top half, basically draws everything together. It encapsulates that castle, it encapsulates the name Disney, it encapsulates all that and brings it into one thing, and says this is all one thing together. They're all parts of a whole. Now, if you move over to the NASA one, for example, this is an idea of this, again, this encompassing whole, yeah? As in NASA, the space agency, okay? So it's trying to portray this idea that NASA itself takes this vast idea of space and makes it manageable to the commoner, if that makes sense, you know, to the layman's term. This idea that through NASA, this unbreachable expanse is achievable by the community, by this group of people. And you can see that they've actually got two circles using here. Obviously, the main circle that encompasses the logo, but then this oval, this ellipse that represents a star in orbit, or a planetary body in orbit, not necessarily a star, around the NASA logo, which is sort of layers upon layers of community and longevity, obviously, especially in this one. Google logo then, for example, is incredibly well designed and has got a perfect use of circles to, obviously, here you're working with text, so you are limited by the shapes of the letters that they need to be. However, you can see that they've made the O's in Google absolutely perfectly symmetrical. Same goes for the G's. The capital G especially has been worked out to be a perfect circle, even to the point where the length of the sort of, I don't know what you call it, that the prong of the G, if you'd like, would perfectly fit inside the gap that is left behind. So it's almost like they've just taken a segment out of the circle to make it a G. So the circle here is very, very prominent. Similar thing for Burger King. However, the different weighting also gives it a sense of movement, things like that as well. It's like a big swoosh around the burger. Starbucks, same sort of thing. Obviously, community is very important because it doesn't sell coffee, it sells a state of mind. That's what Starbucks does. And Vodafone, again, it's a mobile network. Network, the very key word of that is a sense of community, a sense of acceptance. You know, come with us, we are trustworthy, we will not take all your money, we will take all your money and provide to you in return a community and a sense of worth. Now, that's a lot to draw from a circle, but there are people who are paid millions of pounds to determine this and to understand the theory behind it. I am in no way one of those people. My understanding of logo design and shape theory is probably not much better than your own, but I am just trying to impart a little bit of knowledge here for the observations that I have made throughout my time working as a designer. So here, for example, circles don't necessarily have to be the dominant element to portray their meaning. Now you can see here in these two websites, and there's a link in the bottom right-hand corner of the page if you want to go check out more of these. The circles are almost used, on the left design, they're very dominant, okay? The two O's in Zoom, they're sort of the main focal point of the page, again using color to make them the focal point, surrounding them in a darker gray so that they stand out. But also the circles are used to sort of draw your eye down the page, as well as around. So you can see that here the weighting is very much from the top left to the bottom right, and your eye naturally moves that as it follows the curves of the shapes. Now they are just a web design company based in India, but what they're trying to do is a sense of, again, this worldwide. Yeah, they're based in India, but they are a community. They're a community you can trust to build your website for you. This is what they're trying to say. I have no idea whether they are actually any of this, but they're trying to remain accessible. Yeah, so it's very child-friendly, not child-friendly, but very friendly colors, you know, quite childish colors rather. And this sense of this kind of almost sans serif fonts, and especially the circles using the word design up there, they all are trying to imbue this sense of trustworthy, you know, longevity community, as in we'll always be here for you and we are in ourselves a community. Same thing goes on to the right. However, the circles here are less dominant. It's just going to show that even subtle shapes can still portray what you want them to portray. And here it just explores again a little bit of color. So combining it with the yellow makes it pop and makes you think happy, sunshine, you know, victory, I think in this case, as a man that overcomes HIV, I think this website is, and this sense of power because of the color. And obviously the circle gives that sense as well, this all-encompassing power. Now, on the left-hand side, you've got the more toned-down colors because it's actually, I think, a green campaign. It's about a campus going green and being sustainable. And the colors there, used again with the sense of community that the circles portray, have this tranquility to it. And that's something that curved lines also portrays, this tranquility, this calm. And we'll get a bit to that later. But it's good to understand how all these elements come together to portray a meaning. So moving on to squares and rectangles then. Now, squares and other hard-edged shapes like triangles, but we'll move on to that later. They represent, or they don't represent, they portray naturally in their very being a sense of stability. Inherent in this becomes balance and efficiency, but also a sense of strength, okay? So when you look at a square, it looks, by its very nature, solid. Okay, and I've reinforced this here by having a shadow that's being cast. So there's other things that you can attribute that to sort of augment your portrayal. But squares and rectangles by their very nature look dependable, they look strong, and they look professional. Now, unfortunately, if you combine hard-edged shapes with the cooler colors on the spectrum, it can make a design look uninviting. Now, this isn't necessarily true. For example, the NES console system by Nintendo, that's all great and it's all hard-edged, but it was marketed in such a way that it didn't matter. Plus, back in the 80s and 90s, 80s for the NES, those colors were very much the colors of technology, whereas now it's more cool blues and dark grays, kind of coming back into trend now. Just a warning there, color is very important when you're combining it with shapes. Some logos then, for example. A great example here is the Hillary Clinton logo, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later because of its great use of the arrow as well built in there. But for example, all these huge companies, Microsoft, Marvel, BBC, all want to have a sense of professionalism, stability, yeah? Especially the BBC. The BBC's idea behind them is they're always going to be here. You can trust the BBC. The BBC was the first television channel in England. It dominated, it had a huge monopoly over most television for a long, long time in England and still does. Not so much nowadays because they're not really keeping up with the times. However, this logo is built to say, I am solid, I am dependable, I will always be here. I am the BBC, yeah? And it gets that by having these three solid, equally spaced squares that very much state, just by looking at it, you can tell this is supposed to be a solid, dependable logo. Okay, no frills, no funny business, just efficiency. Okay, similar sort of thing with the Microsoft logo, with the Windows, obviously. However, they've throwing some poppy colors in there to make it a bit more approachable. Marvel, again, the same sort of thing. Nice bold red to say that they're a bit out of the ordinary. But again, a big, solid, dependable rectangle. Adobe, of course, because they're trying to say that they are the leading manufacturer of artistic software, okay? And you've got to be dependable. You've got to be solid and understandable. Also, they throw themselves out there as sort of not teachers necessarily, but the people with the knowledge. Okay, and to be the people with the knowledge, you have to be dependable, and therefore they've gone for this sort of hard-edged, quite angular logo, even in the font face that they've chosen, for example, just to say that we are the be-all and end-all of design. Okay, Flipboard, similar sort of thing. Domino's Pizza, I just threw that one in there because I'm not sure why they chose a square. Now, I know why they did, because it's a bloody domino, yeah, as in the game, Domino's. But it just goes to show that you can twist this on its side and have a diamond. A square doesn't have to be square, flat-edged, yeah? It could be rotated. You can do whatever you want. However, then that does start to portray the similar sort of things as triangles and things like that. Just something to be aware of. Now, DHL, for example, doesn't inherently have rectangular things about it. There are the rectangles on the side and some of the letters have been cut up to be part of rectangles, but it's a bit more unique in that the rectangle here is more abstract, if that makes sense. Now, the text is tilted to the right to give it an idea of speed, because obviously they're a delivery company, things like that. And it kind of supposed to look like a tire tread as well, is my understanding. Hence cutting it in half, things like that. So there's all these things that are imbued in there, but the basic thing, if you look at the border of it, it's still a rectangle, okay? And it's still a square shapes and solid hard edges to say, we're dependable, we're efficient, and we're going to get your package to you on time. Oops. So, yeah, if you break down a logo to its basic shapes, these ideas, they never change. They're always there because naturally that is the way the human mind deconstructs them. Okay, so squares are often used in web design because the back end of web design is grids mainly. Excuse me, that was my hand knocking there. Now, it's easy to build web apps and websites based off of grids because that's how a computer understands the world. It's easy to chop it up into squares. That doesn't mean they have to be boring, however. For example, on these next pages here, just because they're made up of grids doesn't mean they have to be regimented. You can be quite abstract with the positioning, with the colors. For example, on the left here, you've got all sorts of different sizes, that sort of flipboard style. And on the right, you've got all the pastel colors and the asymmetrical layout to imbue that sense of, yes, we're dependable and we're reliable, but we're also still inventive. And that's the important thing. Square doesn't have to be boring. That is a complete fabrication. You can do some wonderful things with squares. Triangles then. Let's move on to triangles. Triangles are often associated with things like power, science, religion, law, order, those sort of things, because the triangle in itself, in terms of construction, is probably one of the strongest shapes you can have. Now, whether that's related or not, I don't know. All I know is that if you use it for the Triforce, then it's got to be important. Am I right? So there's this natural inherent being that a triangle has that associates it with power. Now, personally, I think this is because triangles, they always tend to point towards something, okay? Because they have 3 points to them. So whichever way they go, they're pointing at something, yeah? So it's this idea of progress, of moving forward, of going towards an aim, yeah? Or a goal or a being or something. It's progress of moving towards something. And I think personally that's where this idea of power and especially religion comes from, this idea of making progress towards a goal. However, like squares and rectangles, they also convey the things such as stability, balance, professionalism, efficiency, strength due to their hard edges, okay? So you can combine triangles and squares quite easily. For example, here in these logos, the network rail one, for example, they've taken a triangle, taken a couple of strips out of it to make it look like a railway, and it's pointing to the right. It gives that idea of progress, but also that stuff of not necessarily law and order and religion are there. However, triangles, their other main conveyancing, that's not a word. Their other main, what they mean is progress. Yeah, they always point. That's my point. My point is they always point. So it's this idea of making progress, this idea of power, a goal to go towards, okay? Even with Adobe, for example, the triangle of the A gives them that sense of law and order, and we are the ones you can trust. Cat, for example, make manufacturing things like boots, for example, is the most famous thing they make. And they are a brand that is well known for their steel toe cap boots, which are solid, dependable, okay, powerful, yeah? Now, here's Google Play, for example, not necessarily dependable, not necessarily powerful, not necessarily religious. However, that arrow comes back, that progress arrow. It's universally accepted now that an arrow facing towards the right is a play button, okay? Now, but even way before that, it gave you that sense of progress, especially in the Western Hemisphere where we read from left to right. It gives you that sense of moving forward, of play, yeah, of go. Now, they're inherently masculine as well, and I don't mean that in, they make you manly, but I mean that in the way that for years and years, this idea of masculinity has been associated with power. Now, I'm not going to get into whether that's right or wrong. I don't think it's right. But there is that association that advertisers use to get you to buy their products, yeah? Mustang, Mitsubishi. Pretty much all car manufacturers have got, if they're geared towards men, have got some form of triangle in their logo or in their designs. Okay, it's just something to be aware of and something that you should maybe try to notice in the real world a bit more. So triangles are great building tools because they're very versatile. Now on this, on the left here, there's not necessarily at first glance a prominent triangle, okay? There is in the top, of course, the menu, things like that. But if you dissect those rhombuses that make up the background, they're not actually rectangles. They're closer to a triangle design. The way that it's weighted, for example, makes your eye naturally make a cut from that middle point in the top middle of the screen down through the Classico word to that bottom right brown section. Your eye naturally kind of chops that up due to the placement of the text, which means that you dissect this page in your brain as a series of triangles, not as a series of rectangles, or at least I do. And then on the right here, for example, it makes a really interesting way to lay out a grid that isn't necessarily a square. Okay, now technically it is, they're boxed by squares. So if you look at each triangle, for example, you can put an imaginary box around it, and they're lined up in that sort of 2x3 or 3x2 layout. However, the use of the triangle, coupled with the let's go rally, yeah, it gives you that idea of movement, of progress, of power, of doing things. And that's where I think that understanding of science and religion comes from. This power of this presence of progress, this presence of going and doing, which is ironic, really, in the state of religion, certainly. But I'm not going to get into that. I alienate half my audience there, maybe. So yeah, absolutely. Just keep that in mind. Triangles are great building tools because you can use them in so many different ways. So they work equally well as a dominant or a tertiary feature, much like the circles before. Now, a dominant feature on the left here, because your eye obviously goes straight to the center of the screen and draws out from there. And this is a really great composition, a perfect way of combining rectangles and triangles. Okay, something to keep in mind. This is beautifully constructed, this web page on the left. Your eye naturally follows exactly where it's want to go along those lines. Yeah, it dissects the page. It gives you this idea of they're in control of their environment, okay? Which is obviously what they're trying to portray here with the man climbing the rocks and the women doing exercise and things like that. On the right hand, for example, the triangle bursts out from the page because the rest of it is locked in with these regimented squares, yeah? The contents of the squares doesn't even really matter. It's the fact that this triangle stands out in the center as a dominant feature, okay? As something to draw your eye and to be the focus of your attention, which is what triangles are great at, okay? They're being the focus of things. So let's move on quickly then to horizontal and vertical lines. I'm not going to get into too much detail here because they're inherent in the shapes that they sort of built from, if that makes sense. So vertical lines then, for whatever reason, tend to give you a sense of masculinity, of strength, of aggression, okay? I think this is because this idea of you look up and down, okay, is this idea of not necessarily horizontal is obviously progress, but looking up at things and looking down at things can either be daunting if you're looking up, or you give you a sense of power if you're looking down. And it's that idea of your eyes drawn up and down the page that gives you that sense of you're either in control or something is in control of you. Horizontal lines, on the other hand, or curved horizontal lines, as you can see there, give you that sense of community, tranquility, and calm. That's why waves are always represented by this horizontal curved line, okay? It's not just because it looks like a wave, it's because it gives you that idea of the ocean, this idea of like tranquility, and sort of not melancholy, but acceptance. Again, it comes back to this community thing, okay? Your eye is drawn along, you're making progress, yeah? So we've only just scratched the surface of shape theory. There's so much more. One thing I highly recommend you check out is Gestalt Theory, which is one of the core foundations of understanding the theory behind everything to do with what is on the page. Okay, so composition, weighting, balance, shapes, colors, things like that, cutouts, negative space, positive space, everything you want to know basically starts in Gestalt Theory. So make sure you check that out. My rule one, it sounds a bit cheesy, but my rule one is everything should mean something. If you put it on the page, it means something, because meaning is everything. Whatever you're doing, whatever you're making, whatever piece of media you're making, it has a meaning, whether you think it does or doesn't. Even if the meaning is, I just want this to look good, yeah? You still have to understand how to do that, and you still have to understand how the things you put on the page influence that. And everything you do does have meaning, everything should have meaning, and the worst thing I think you can do as a designer is just put something there because. Yeah, just plonk it down because you think, oh, it looks a bit boring, oh, it looks a bit this, whatever. If you want to do that, that's fine. I'm not knocking it at all. I'm just saying that what separates good designers from great designers, which again, I don't think I am. I'm definitely trying to be. It's what I aspire to be. But what separates good designers and great designers is great designers know why every single thing on their page is there, why every single element is where it is and looks the way it does. And they understand that. And that's what separates the men from the boys and the ladies from the girls. So thank you for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this. Sorry, it was a bit of a long one, but I think it was worth it. I hope you do too. If you have any tips or advice or anything like that, please just pop them in the comments below. Or actually, I have an email address now, info@tiptut.xyz. You can check it out there, pop any questions along that you have. However, in the meantime, I really hope you enjoyed the video, guys, and I'll see you all next time.
Remember to subscribe for more tips, tricks, and tutorials. Thanks for watching.